The bubonic plague, known for its horrifying death toll and gruesome symptoms, didn't just appear out of nowhere. Its history stretches far back before the infamous Black Death of the 1300s. In fact, the first ever recorded outbreak was during the Plague of Justinian during the Byzantine Empire between 541 and 542 AD. The plague is caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, named after the scientist who discovered it, Alexander Yersin, in 1894. Yersinia pestis is primarily transmitted to humans via the bites of infected fleas, which live on rodents like rats. These tiny carriers have been at the center of several pandemics throughout history. Each origin can be traced to the steppes of Central Asia, particularly near China or Mongolia. From there, it spread westward through the trade routes, most notably the Silk Road. The movement of traders, armies and goods between Europe and Asia became the perfect mechanism for diseases to hitch a ride and spread. It's fascinating to think about how the interconnectedness of the ancient world, much like today, allowed diseases to travel rapidly across continents. But back then there was no understanding of microbes, no antibiotics, no quarantine measures like we have now. People were utterly prepared. Imagine a world where no one understood how diseases spread, no germ theory, no concept of bacteria or viruses, just the belief that illness was a divine punishment or an evil curse. But this was a reality for the people living in these ancient outbreaks. The Black Death of the 14th century. Now let's fast forward to the 14th century, the most notorious and devastating outbreak of the bubonic plague. It occurred between 1347 and 1351. Known as the Black Death, the pandemic wiped out an estimated 25 to 50 million people in Europe alone, about 1/3 to half of the entire population. So how did it start? In 1347, the plague is believed to have entered Europe through the port of Messina in Sicily. Ships arriving from the Black Sea carried not only goods but also infected rats and fleas. The disease quickly spread across Italy and throughout Europe, reaching England, France, Spain, and even as far as Scandinavia and Russia. This death toll was staggering. Entire towns were wiped out and mass graves were common. In some places, the mortality reached as high as 60%. Cities like Florence and Paris, bustling metropolises of the time, were brought to their knees. The symptoms were horrific swollen, blackened lymph nodes, called buboes, high fever, vomiting and agonizing pain. Once someone contracted the plague, they usually died within a few days. Can you imagine the fear and chaos? People didn't understand what was happening. They believed it was divine punishment for sins, and regular and religious fervor gripped Europe. Some turned to extreme forms of penance, like the flagellants, who whipped themselves in public as an atonement for humanity's sins, hoping to ward off God's wrath. But the Black Death wasn't just a health crisis, it also had profound economical and social benefits. Yeah. Labor shortages, for example, led to higher wages for workers who survived. Entire villages were abandoned and the feudal system began to crumble, eventually paving the way for the rise of the modern world. So what made the bubonic plague so deadly? Let's get into the science behind it. As I mentioned earlier, the plague is caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. This bacterium is typically transmitted through fleas that live on rodents like rats. When an infected flea bites a human, the bacteria enters the bloodstream. From there, it wreaks havoc on the body. There are actually three forms of the plague: bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic. Bubonic plague is the most common, where the bacteria infect the lymphatic system. This is what causes the painful swollen buboes, large lumps in the armpit, neck, or groin area. The bacteria multiply rapidly in these areas, leading to severe inflammation and, in many cases, death. The other two forms are even more lethal. Septicemic plague occurs when the infection spreads to the bloodstream, leading to severe sepsis, tissue death, and organ failure. Pneumonic plague affects the lungs and can be transmitted through respiratory droplets, making it highly contagious between people. Now here's something to think about. At the time of the Black Death or bubonic plague, no one knew what was causing the disease or how it spread. Some thought it was bad air or miasma. Others believed it was divine punishment. This lack of knowledge meant that effective quarantine and hygiene practice didn't exist. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the plague was how fast it could kill. Infected individuals could go from healthy to dead within few days, sometimes even within a few hours. Entire families would succumb to the disease, and before you know it, the plague would spread to neighboring towns or cities. That's it for today's episode. In the next episode, we will dive into the day-to-day life during the plague and how people coped with the plague, the superstitions that took place during that time, and how the rise of the plague doctors came to be. Thank you.